Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. This is going to be something of a rambling and desultory video in response to a video posted just a few days ago by booktuber Michael K. Vaughan titled "The Next 15 Penguin Classics I'm Going to Read." Now, I'm filming a few days later, but my video will probably not go up for another week or so. This video is not really a direct response to anything that Mr. Vaughan said about the books in his list, but so many of the books that he brought up stirred up resonances with me, and I thought I would try to do my own video, not about penguins, but about, as far as I could do it, or as closely as I could match them, the same titles which he brought up in his video. So let me start, and I will be allowing this to go on tangents here and there. The first video that he mentioned was Wilkie Collins' No Name, but offhandedly he mentioned that his favorite Wilkie Collins novel was The Woman in White. I have not read any Wilkie Collins, and when I do, if I do, this is the novel that I will start with. I picked this up at the charity bookstore within the last half year or so. This was the title I was seeking out. It was between this or The Moonstone, and his books are regular presences at the charity bookstore, but often in editions that you don't want to touch. I would have liked a Penguin edition, but this was the best there was. It's a Bantam mass market, and there have been so many videos going around about mass market paperbacks. I thought, what the heck? Well, I didn't think that at the time because they had not been out, but I am thinking that now. Now, it is Victober, which is a booktube event celebrating Victorian writers. I don't think I will be getting to Wilkie Collins. I'm going to try to squeeze in something, but it will either be George Eliot, Adam Bede, I think, or else George Gissing, Grub Street. But I don't know. Eliot is the likely choice. But anyhow, that's Wilkie Collins on my TBR. Now, the second book mentioned by Mr. Vaughan, or perhaps I can say Michael or Michael K., was Homer, the Iliad, and this is the translation by E.V. Ryu. Now, this one has been revised and updated by D.C.H. Ryu, his son or grandson or something like that. I don't know. And this was the edition that I read last year. I had never read the Iliad previously, and believe it or not, the reason that I chose this edition was because I heard about it on a video posted by Michael K. Vaughan. He's talked about the Iliad before. So there's that. Now, I tend to like, I don't know what you call these, real important baseline translations, and then when they've been slightly updated to reflect either the times or advanced scholarship, I'm generally good with that. Now, I have another one. This is Robert Fagel's. And actually, after I read the Iliad, I went through, I had so many Iliads and Odysseys, which I picked up over the years. I had the Fitzgeralds, I had I don't know what I had, and there was a massive culling of Homers. I don't know how this one escaped. I guess because it's a big volume. Penguin also has this out in a little trade paper about this size. And I like Fagel's translation of I think it's Aeschylus, one of the playwrights. I liked that very much, but I don't particularly care for his translations of Homer. As a long practicing poet, and from the standpoint of a poet, the last thing you probably would want to look at is a verse translation of any epic poem. The reason being that you're going to sacrifice meaning for probably mediocre poetics. Now, I will make an exception here or there. The first time I ever read Dante's Divine Comedy was in the Dorothy Sayers translation. It's probably a bit absurd on a point-to-point, what is that called, meaning, word-to-word basis, but it really got me into the story of Dante. And so ultimately the rule, as Steve Donahue has mentioned numerous times on his channel, is that you should go with the translation that speaks to you. For me, though, for any sort of epic poetry, and oftentimes for other sorts of poetry, I would prefer as literal a translation as I can get, because I don't need somebody's bad iambics, or worse, their attempts at terza rima, or in some cases they just change all that around. I don't need to go off on that tangent. Now, Michael K. Vaughan's next book that he mentioned was E.V. Rieu's Odyssey. I read this as a boy in high school. It was required reading. It was not this translation. We read the Palmer translation. But having had such a good time with Homer's Iliad, translated by Rieu, I decided, well, I had better get the Odyssey in case I decide to return to it with mature eyes. Now, I did not really like the Iliad all that much. I might like this one a little better, I don't know, but we'll see. So that was that. The next book that Michael mentioned was Middlemarch by George Eliot, and he showed up a nice new copy with the new style, with that white band across with a colorless penguin, and speculated that the reason for that was so that in the online displays of books, you will know right off whether it's a penguin or not, because there are so many copycat editions out there of books that are in the public domain. And I believe he is probably right. Up until that, when I first saw them was last year when I was reading some Dickens, and the thought that popped into my head was that they want to sort of dumb down the formatting because they want to produce more of their books via print on demand, and so they want to have a vast array of printers handling them, and print on demand publishers just cannot handle any great refinements like you would find in traditional printing. But I don't know, that's also sheer speculation. I read this a number of years ago. It's not my favorite book, certainly. I last year read Romola by this author and loved it. And so I'm hoping to read another by Eliot this year. We shall see how that goes for me. Now, the next book that was held up was Victory by Joseph Conrad. I've not read an awful lot of Conrad. I've read many of his short stories, if not all of his short stories. But for novels, not so many. And he said, Michael K. Vaughan said that everything that Joseph Conrad wrote is probably worth reading. That may well be the case, but I will tell you about the time that I jumped ship with Joseph Conrad. Lord Jim, I was reading that, and I don't know how far I got, 100 or so pages, and he did something in this book. I had intimations that this was going to happen, so it was not a surprise, but I felt he sort of broke an unspoken or unwritten contract with the reader, and I was upset. Now, I was not totally understanding what he was saying all the way, so I could be totally wrong about that. But regardless, my dudgeon went higher. I was appalled and aghast, and I set the book down and I said, well, goodbye, Mr. Conrad. Now the next book, ha ha ha. Raphael Sabatini, Captain Blood. And I have a similar story, although, and speaking of Michael K. Vaughan, he has this annoying tick of referring to himself as an old man. And I know for a fact that he is something of a youngin'. I have done the calculations, and I know he is a youngin'. So I had something of a similar experience to him, which is that I watched this movie on TV every chance I got. I never bothered with, what was it? Robin Hood, but Captain Blood, that's a different matter. And to even show how much I liked the movie, I went and bought the 8-track of the soundtrack by Korngold, and I would listen to that. So that tells you something. I bet Mr. Vaughan did not do that. So when I was reading last year, The Prisoner of Zenda, now that was a featured book in Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. I read it a month or two, something like that, before I could look it up. Let's see when I actually read it, if I can find it. This is the book in which I note all of my reading. Where's The Prisoner of Zenda? I read it in December of last year. And I love that book so much. And so I looked around online and I thought, I wanted to find out what else existed in that vein, and apparently not something else by Anthony Hope. He did a sequel and I think a set of short stories relevant to the same kingdom, but the sequel, Rupert of whatever, I bought a dual volume edition, also published by Penguin, and I read enough of the introduction to realize that he really screwed things up in that sequel, and so I wanted to leave my experience with Prisoner of Zenda perfect. And so I decided I will not go and corrupt it with the sequel. But I also picked up Captain Blood, which I never read. Michael K. Vaughan was much more on the ball as a youngin' than I was. He talks about the edition that was out when he was first finding out about penguins, and I think this is the what they looked like when I started buying penguins. And then the later ones I totally missed because I really wasn't into reading all that much. I don't know how that is relevant to anything, but let us move on. The next book on the list was the portable Edgar Allan Poe, in Mr. Vaughan's case, edited by Edgar Kennedy. Now, I have the portable Poe, edited by Philip Van Doren Stern. And this book is notable because it is probably one of the first books that I ever bought. I had to have been 15 years old at the time. I bought it at Crocs and Brentano's in the Oakbrook Mall, where I had a part-time job. I was pretending that I was 16. It's stayed with me. I have a bigger volume that's something of a complete Poe, although I don't think any of this stuff has letters, which he mentioned his edition has letters, unless there's maybe a letter to the editor here or there. But I would get rid of that thing before I would get rid of this. So it's a very meaningful book to me. Next on the list, and here is where we have to part ways. He mentioned Jerome K. Jerome's 3 Men in a Boat. Come on, guys. It's enough, kiddo. Come on. Settle down, Bubba. Settle down, Bubba. Come on. Settle down. Settle down. Ugh. You should see the ridge along his back. It's like, like a mohawk. Come on, that's enough. So, he has dogs that bark. I have dogs that bark. And Mark at Book Time with Elvis has a dog who does not seem to bark all that much. But he mentioned Mark in conjunction with this book, 3 Men in a Boat. I thought that I had it, but I don't. It has the appearance of the kind of thing that one picks up, but I didn't, and I don't. Or if I did, I had it briefly and it went, but I don't believe so. So I decided to do a little show and tell and give you some nautical books. Mainly this is the one I wanted to show you, Master and Commander. Now this goes a long way back for me, not this book, but this series, because back before there was an internet, I used to get the catalog from Daedalus Books, and they were not a publisher. They would sell remainders and stuff like that, and they always had a big section of these Patrick O'Brian books, and I always was curious about them. It's not the kind of thing that I would read. I'm not interested in reading it. Now, mind you, I said that about John Le Carré novels, and then I got a copy of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and I read it, and I really enjoyed it. But this is not my thing. But I was at the dentist the other day, and near the dentist, there's this used bookshop, and this was there along with about 3 or 4 other volumes from the series for $1 each, and it's in perfect shape. And I thought, well, how can I pass up a $1 mint edition of something that I'm not going to read, but you never know, I might read. And I passed up on the other ones because if I do read it, it's highly unlikely I'll go on with the series. You never know, but they are out there, so if I did, I could find them. And then I just thought I would show you 2 Years Before the Mast, which is also a book on my TBR. I would like to get to it one day. Okay, the next item up was the Robin Buss translation of The Count of Monte Cristo, published by Penguin. I have it in this cloth-bound edition. I'm not really a lover of these Penguin cloth-bound editions, although I've noticed a lot of booktubers actually have this very same volume. And at the time, it was on my bucket list last year as I was making my first forays into trying to become a reader. And so I read it in February of 2022. And Michael has fears that it will take forever to get through. I poured through this. I could not believe the speed with which I tore through the pages. And then afterwards, my eyes fell apart and I was a mess for a whole month. I wish I could have slowed down, but the story is rather compelling. I initially had a paperback edition like the one he showed, and I just felt that I needed a slightly larger font, and so I went for the cloth-bound edition. Alas, the slightly larger font did not save me. Okay, after that we have Apollonius of Rhodes, and this is a book that Penguin seems to have, or have in two different editions. I don't know if it's the same text. I don't know about the story, but let me show you what I mean if I can hold this up. You see there? So there's the Voyage of Argo, translated by Ryu again, and then there's a volume titled Jason and the Argonauts, translated by somebody else. And this is another case where sometime after reading the Iliad, I thought, the only other, instead of the Odyssey, the only other Greek epic that I really want to look at is the story of Jason. And I wanted to go again with the E.V. Ryu translation. And so I got it in a nicer edition. Now I had to ultimately buy this one new. I bought used copies of it from vendors online and got the worst, horrible mass markets with pages falling out and pages that have yellowed so much it's like a dark shade of brown, and so I would just get rid of them. And I finally bought this, and I hope to get to this one fairly soon. I don't understand why Penguin has it in a couple of different editions, or if one is more complete than the other, or if they're based on different texts. I just don't know. The Penguin Classics book does not clarify any of that. So, after that, here we are completely out of my league. Michael showed a book of short stories by Thomas Ligotti and said that they were very weird stories, but very good. The only thing that I can think of comparable that I have, and I don't know why I have it because I don't generally read weird stories. Well, maybe I should take that back when I think about, well, I won't go into that. That's for another video. But this, God knows why I have it and why I picked it up. Now, the White People and Other Weird Stories, so that lets you know they're weird. These white people, I guess, are not white people like me. They're weird in a different way. I don't know that I will ever read it, but I should at least give myself a story or two. I have no idea what it's about. But then I also thought, well, let me pull out this book. I have no idea what this is, just something picked up at the charity. And it looks pretty weird to me too. So next up, Ray Russell, The Case Against Satan. That was completely unknown to me. That's completely unheard of. I had no idea anything about that. It's not a book I've seen. So it was the one that intrigued me most. And I'm not going to get it probably unless I see it. I'm not going to order it to have it. But I thought for the sake of this video, I should find something that's along the lines of, as opposed to the case against Satan, something like the case against God. And I thought, well, should I pull down something by Nietzsche? And no, and there's others who have written cases against God, and I just couldn't think of what they might be. So I decided to pull down something akin that is something that I actually do want to read, Bertrand Russell, Why I Am Not a Christian. I have several books by Russell, and philosophy is not my bag, but I definitely want to read Russell because every little thing that I've heard from him over the years, even just in passing, has held up magnificently. And so I think I owe it to this man to read some of his writing. Next up was Herodotus, and Michael held up the Tom Holland translation. I do not have that. I don't know if I did have that. I had to do some weeding with Herodotus as well. And here's one that I have. I don't know anything about this. I actually picked it up just because I think that this is a beautiful edition. I think it's the Everyman edition. This is just beautiful. Every time I would see this, I thought that is such a beautiful book. And so eventually I just bought it. If I read Herodotus, and I've read some Herodotus, I don't remember where I stopped at page 50 or 100. I went with I think it's the Aubry de Selencourt translation published by Penguin, and that is the one that I will go with. I have in the back of my mind a vague project of reading all of the ancient historians, and I am not at the level where I could do something like that yet. And it's a project that I think would be great fun, but it would require an immense commitment, probably a good year's commitment to do. I think there's totally something like 26 of them. And I'm just talking about the ones that are easily accessible in Penguin or Oxford editions. So that's it. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Tom Holland, at least not of his books. I tried to read one of his books. Is it Persian Fire? I don't remember, but at first I thought I was really going to like the writing style, but then when I tried to get into it, I didn't. But I did see a video online in which he talks about the foundations of Islam, and he states that there is a period, a gap of something like 60 years, akin to the 75 years in the Christian tradition between the death of Christ and the writing of the Gospels, where during this 60 years after the death of Muhammad, the text of the Quran was actually being developed, and the whole religion was being developed under very mysterious circumstances. It's a video on YouTube that you can find. I'll link it below if I think of that. He seems like a very interesting thinker. I've watched some of his YouTube speeches at symposiums, and he's very listenable. One day I may try another of his books, but there is so much on my TBR, I really need to be a better reader than I am now in order to have the hope of getting to it. So after Herodotus, the Brontes were brought up, and Michael had a 3-in-1 edition which contained Jane Eyre by Charlotte, Wuthering Heights by Emily, and Agnes Grey by the other one, Anne. And I was appalled, honestly, because of those authors. My favorite was Anne Bronte, but for The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, it's not an uncommon reaction. I tried, after loving Tennant so much, I tried to read Agnes Grey and could not stand it. So I felt that Penguin, if that's who it was, or Viking, did Anne a disservice by putting those 3 volumes together. Now, if I were to reread any of them at this time, it would be Emily's Wuthering Heights. A number of booktubers have just recently read it for the first time, I think, or for the first time after many years, and discovered it to be quite different from what they expected, and very good. Almost, as Michael said, something of a horror book or something else, a book laden with cruelty and just terrible people doing terrible things and no likable characters at all. I don't remember taking that from the story. I read it very young, and I was probably trying to squeeze it into some kind of preconceived mold of a romance, and people have said it is not a romance. So that's it. As I say, if I do any Victobering, and I would like to, it will be either Gissing or Eliot again. And the last book was Tale of Genji. This was a big milestone on my way to becoming a reader, and I would have to go and scour through my Facebook posts to figure out when it was. It's probably 7 or 8 years ago now that I read The Tale of Genji. There were a couple of books that sat on my shelf for years, this and the Cairo trilogy, also in an Everyman's edition. And I thought about them and thought about them. And then finally, at some point after 5, 6, 8 years, I said, you know, this is stupid. I just have to knuckle down and do it. And so I read them. I read the Cairo trilogy first, and then I read The Tale of Genji. I don't tend to do a lot of rereading, but this is a book that probably would bear rereading. It's something of an alien landscape when you first enter it. And at the time, I did a lot of other ancillary reading. I read other authors of the time, and I read the Shining Prince, which gives a history of the period. I appreciate the side and sticker translation. I've looked at the Royal Tyler, and I decided, initially I was thinking that I would, if I reread it, I would go with that, but I like side and sticker so much, and I am a loyalist when it comes to translators. I am realizing I have to let go some of that, and maybe I will. But honestly, the next thing that I would like to read by side and sticker, he translated so many of those initial Japanese classics that were available in English. I would like to read his history of Tokyo. So the first volume is Low City, High City, and the second volume is Tokyo Rising. And hopefully I'm getting closer. I will, God willing, read these before I revisit The Tale of Genji. So this video is much ado about nothing, really does not respond in point to anything that Michael said in his video, but I encourage you to go watch his video. It really brought all of these thoughts and reminiscences bubbling up and prompted me to make this video. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.